Hello, my name is Justin Bright, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.7.3. I am starting a brand new series, and as you can see, that is not Karman in the background, that is Africa. This is indeed going to be a realism overhaul, realistic progression 1 playthrough, in which I am going to be going through the career mode of Real Solar System and attempting to kind of futz my way through all of the different complexities that Realism Overhaul brings to the base game. Without chattering too much about that just while sitting on this start screen, I just want to say that Realism Overhaul and RP-1 is an absolute marvel of a mod, and it's a ton of fun to play, but it was a big challenge for me to get into when I tried to play this previously. I found that my favorite part of it, though, was when I couldn't get a mission to work, and then I would have to dig into the contract and read what they wanted and figure out, oh, well, they're trying to tell me to put this thing not into orbit, but they're trying to get me to go downrange, for example, and I need to figure out, well, how did we do that? How did we do that in real life, and how can I match what this mission requirement is against the real historical achievements of that time period, and using that to cross-reference what engines I had available and what other parts I had available to figure out how I can make that happen in the game with a inspiration from reality. And I thought that was so cool, and it was so much fun when I did that last time, and 1.7.3 sees a relatively new update to Realism Overhaul's RP-1 mod, so I figured I would give that a shot and we'll see how that goes. As I go through, I'm going to be playing this a little bit blind, but also sort of not, because like I said, I have played this before in an earlier version. But when I have those moments where I can't figure something out, I'm not going to pretend that I am the authority on RP-1 or Realism Overhaul. I am a noob, and that's kind of where I want to bring you guys along with me, is I want you to experience this with me. I want you to see what it's like to actually play a game of Kerbal Space Program, but also have to draw from history because of the complexities of this mod. We're not going to be using FASA, FASA, or any of the other really prescriptive part mods. We're going to be using mostly just what's baked into the normal install of RP-1. So let's get started. We have here, we're going to start up a brand new career, and I'm going to call this Next Small Step. That is what I have settled on for the name of this series, because one of my goals is to go a little bit further than the real human spaceflight program, but we'll talk about that later on. I don't want to overpromise from the word go. So we're just doing basic moderate settings. RP-1, the wiki for RP-1 tells me that the game is balanced heavily around like easy and normal, but moderate is where most of the veterans play, and so that's kind of where I want to get to. I think that I can swing it. I'm definitely not a veteran and I'm not an expert, but I think that should work out. But they don't recommend necessarily changing too much of anything else except for turning off the ScanSat official contract pack, because it's all built into RP0 or RP-1. So the only other thing that I'm going to change is I'm going to go into real antennas, and we're going to up this default packet interval to 5. That's something that I've found that I've had to do. You see this increase if encountering the bug with science not being credited, and I have that all the darn time, so we are going to up that just from the word go to see if that makes our life a little bit easier. Okay, so that's it. Now we just need to pick a flag, and I actually love the RP-1 logo here, so I think we're just going to use that one because I think it's very, very neat. So there we go, next small step, let's go. Alright, so when you start a brand new game of Realism Overhaul or Real Solar System, I should really figure out a very easy way to talk about that. RSS, we're just going to call it that. When you start up a new game of RSS, it is dark. It is nighttime. It is 1951, the 1st of January at midnight, and so it is very dark out. So we're not going to spend too much time here, but I do need to mention that we have initial retirement dates that we have to deal with. The actual numbers on here are not actually interesting because the retirement will be delayed the more interesting flights they fly. Hopefully we give them interesting flights. We're going to spend a second looking at Kerbal construction time, and that is what RP-1 uses to kind of balance the production of rockets so that it's not just instantaneous. It gives it a little bit more of a gamey feel, and I actually really, really like it, but I'll talk about more about that as we go forward. There's an RP-1 setting built in, so we don't have to do anything there, but we do start with 2 upgrade points, which is less than the 15 you start with in the stock game. I am actually going to split them up between the VAB and the space plane hangar, giving me 0.1 build speed, like this is effectively 0, 0.1 build speed in both, and I will show you why in just a moment. But first, the other next thing that you need to do is you need to unlock your tech parts node. This is in the guide, as I mentioned, and I will use this point to say, like, okay, here's our first launch contract, here's our unlock our tech parts node. Follow the wiki. When you're setting up this, like that's all I did. I'm not going to talk about what I've installed or how I've installed it because it is all in the wiki. Like I just followed the guide. I didn't do anything strange. I think one of the only mods that I've even installed that is not on there is X Science, so I can track our science production. And so I grab this whole parts node, even though it's got a lot of clutter because I can't be bothered to pick from all of these. One thing that I notice is everything costs 1 in here, just about, except for this, which costs 10,000. And I feel like that can't be right. So I'm just going to add another, or costs 11,000, pardon me. So I'm just going to add 11,000 to our funds after I do this, and we're going to call that fair. All right, so now safely here in the mission control, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing first because it's going to inform a lot of the decisions that we make in the vehicle assembly building. So we've accepted the first launch contract, which is basically the same thing as it is in Kerbal Space Program. Just get something on the pad, have it actually go up in the air. You can't just recover it and then reach 1,000 meters. Boom, you've earned a little bit of money, and more importantly, you've unlocked the next set of contracts. The way that RP-1 works, the progression is gated behind milestones that are in all these different contracts categories. So we are looking first at first launch, obviously, but the ones that are going to open up next, looking ahead with a little bit of spoilers, is Karman line. So that means we're going to need to get up to about 100,000 meters above the Earth's surface, which is a lot harder than it sounds in Realism Overhaul. Then after that, we're going to want to reach a suborbital trajectory, which is going to be 140,000 meters, and then return uncrewed, which, once again, much harder than it sounds. But one step at a time, or 2 steps at a time, I suppose, and I'll tell you why in a moment. We are going to be doing our first launch, and then we're going to be building for Karman line. All right, here we are in the vehicle assembly building. Welcome back. It feels really good. So we're going to start out with the WAC Corporal sounding rocket telemetry unit. Everything, well, just like in KSP you need a probe core, in RP-1 you need telemetry units, and using these pre-built ones allows us to kind of skip over a lot of the complications of these at first. But let's take a look really quickly at what we have available to us. So we have a couple different engines, the A4 and the RD-100, which are essentially identical at this point, but they are based on the V2 missile, which is, you know, the historical rocket developed by Werner von Braun. But it's huge. We don't need that much rocket for the very first thing that we launch. We want something a little bit more like this, the Aero B, which is currently, and if we go into the engine GUI, this is the WAC Corporal, which, as you may remember from the name of this probe core. So that's basically what we're starting off with, is the WAC Corporal. So the WAC Corporal was a Navy 2-stage testing sounding rocket. And we are actually going to leave out the first half of that, and we'll talk about the rest of it first. But first, we're going to talk about the booster that it goes on top of, which is this, the Tiny Tim. This little guy right here is a tiny little solid rocket booster. Got just the tiniest amount of burn time. It expends this entire payload in 0.6 seconds, which sounds perfect for what we need for our first launch. So let's go ahead and start putting this together. Alright, so I have accelerated this video so you can just kind of get a general idea of how I'm building this. And the way we're doing it is I'm putting together procedural parts. So we had a procedural nose cone, and now I am doing the editing on a B9 procedural wing, which starts as a gigantic weird plank, and then you kind of edit it down to exactly the size and shape that you want. For this particular vessel, we just need something just little tiny that'll help keep this thing guided, and we're going to use this for a lot of our sounding rockets going forward. Just changing up the way that that looks, and there we go, pretty happy with that. Now it's just a matter of adding in our science experiments. We want the barometer and the thermometer, and I'm using RCS build aid to make sure that that is all even. And that is what the actual Tiny Tim rocket looks like underneath a Navy aircraft to be used to fire at ships, I have to imagine. But we'll be using it for more scientific ventures. And so that is going to be our Tiny Tim. So we'll just go ahead and save that, and you see this is going to take us 61 days, which is going to seem like a tremendous amount compared to how much time it takes to build a rocket in regular KSP, even with the Kerbal Construction Time mod. But there are tricks that we have to get that down, and that's just a little bit of gameplay to make it so that time actually matters. But one thing that we can deal with is what's called tooling. So this is a feature that I love and I wish was in normal KSP, and what it's intended to do is drive you to create stages that you then reuse a whole bunch, and actually build like boosters and launch vehicles and upper stages and things that you reuse over and over again, rather than building a brand new rocket for every payload, because we definitely did not do that in real life. So you'll see that the tooling cost for this is pretty expensive. It's 171 funds, and the cost of this thing is only 12 untooled, but it will be 2 tooled. See, so total vessel cost if the parts are all tooled is 49, down from 59 there. So that's going to be expensive, but this is something that we can reuse all the time. So this tiny little nose cone is something that we'll be able to use, and it actually, I think, reduces the cost of similar sized nose cone parts in the future if we want to tool those. So I think this is a good investment, and getting this number down as much as possible is incredibly important because we want to get our research labs running. So we have some science on here, we have some we have a booster, we have our staging seems to be as correct as it's going to be. This is ready to go. So we are actually going to go right ahead and throw this on the list. And from there, that's our first launch. Now let's look into our Karman line contract. So for the Karman line contract, we're going to start with the same rocket, but we are not going to use this the way that it is. It's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to start by moving that off, and we're going to move this up. We are going to be using the Aero-B engine, which is the sustainer engine for the WAC Corporal, and also the Aero-B rocket in the future. It's from the Aero-B mod. It's one of the most important ones, in my opinion, for playing RP-1. So before we even stick that on there, we are going to go ahead and grab a procedural tank, and everything is intended to be procedural in RP-1. And these you can actually get rid of. I'm using the janitor closet mod so that I can get rid of the deprecated parts, which were introduced so that they didn't break anything for people who've been playing for a long time. So procedural parts, as you may be very well familiar, you can size it any which way you want, which is going to be very helpful for the strange builds that we will be building. And now that we have kind of the rough shape of the rocket that we want, I am going to stick the Aero-B engine on the end. And here is how this actually works in terms of the gameplay of it. So you can open up this engine GUI, and that shows you all of the statistics for your engine. And this also shows you how you can upgrade your engine if you get into such things. That's something we'll deal with a lot later on. Mass, the different thrusts, ISP. This is a pressure-fed engine, and it only has one ignition, and it is subject to ullage, which is all complications that we'll deal with. But the first one we need to deal with is the fact that this is pressure fed, which means this needs to be a high pressure tank. I forget this all the time. I get the rocket rolled out to the launch pad, and then it doesn't fire because it's not the right type of tank. Wow. So now Procedural Tanks tells us, like, oh, well, this is the type of fuel that you need. You just click that, there you go. Now we have the fuel loaded. It gives us a 25 seconds of burn time with what I've selected, which is less than the rated burn time. So I'm going through a lot of concepts very quickly, but hopefully these are fairly easy to understand, and I will be definitely talking about them more later. The rated burn time is exactly what it sounds like. This is the amount of time that your engine can burn before its failure rate increases dramatically, and I do mean dramatically. There's one way to play this mod where it fails immediately at that point, but you can kind of go a little bit over time in this mod, and you're, I think, expected to. But your failure rate, which is here, your full burn failure rate is 14%, ignition failure rate 10%. I'm using the test light mod to deal with that. So you're taking a risk. You're taking a risk that your engine is going to fail partway through the mission parameters that you have designed. Pretty scary stuff. But so we've got 50 seconds of burn time on this. Rated burn time is 47 seconds. I think that's a calculated risk and a good amount because we still have plenty of thrust on this. So now we are going to staple on the things on the bottom here, and we are going to use a procedural decoupler, and once again we are going to be trying to make this a size and shape that is going to be useful for us in the future. So I'm thinking maybe a 50 millimeter diameter or 50 millimeter long, 300 millimeter diameter ring of a decoupler, and I think that's going to be useful for the first couple things that we use. So this is once again a reusable thing. And then we slap on the booster that we have on the bottom, and I am going to just grab these fins that we made for it, and I'm going to stick them right up here on the Aerobee stage. And there you go. That is basically what we're looking at for our next launch. And here it is next to an image of its inspiration, the actual Whack Corporal rocket, which, as I've mentioned before, was a sounding rocket tested out by the Navy at one point. And this, the actual image that I have here does not have the booster attached to it, but you can kind of see the same contours, right? And this is kind of something that I'm planning on doing as we go through, is I want to show you the actual historical inspiration for a lot of the things that I'll be using, but I'm not going to give you the full history lesson. There are much better places to find those. Go check out Space Rocket History podcast, for example. Okay, so with this rocket assembled, I think we are just about set. We are just going to fix up the staging. So we are going to want the solid rocket booster to be in the same stage down in that, the first group right there. Then we are going to, I've found success in just putting the engine and the decoupler right in the same stage. That's not always going to be how this works. Having to deal with ullage is a little bit tricky, but we'll talk about that. But yeah, this should work, theoretically, for our next contract, because we've kept this very small, we've kept it very light. So this gets us 2,303 meters per second of delta V off the pad, minus any gravity and drag losses. So I'm hoping that this is going to get us up into the Karman line contract as well. So let's go ahead and save this as our Whack Corporal. And we are going to, I'm going to throw this in the build list now. And let this start to go, and we are going to see, oh, I'm sorry, I screwed up. So this is something you're also going to want to keep in mind. So don't throw things in there until you have finished your tooling, any tooling that you want to do. So once again, you see there's a bunch of money I can spend on the tank and the decoupler that I can reduce that cost. So we are going to do that. It's going to cost me 1,600 funds, and that brings me down from 237 to 83. And let me show you why that is so important. Let's go ahead and add this to the build list. So we're back here. We're looking at the build list. We got 60 days until this Tiny Tim is going, and you'll notice that our technology, there's nothing happening. We want to get that going as fast as possible, so we are going to do some rush building. So this is going to cost the full price of the rocket, and actually a lot more, because I know it didn't cost me a full 1,000 to build the Tiny Tim. So I'm not 100% sure where this number comes from, but it's what we have to deal with, and it's actually worth doing. So we are going to rush build. We can do that up to 5 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, and that brings us down to 35 days. So we can get our first rocket off the ground, 35 days. I think that sounds great. That gets our rockets flying faster, that gets our research going sooner, and that is what we want to get this career moving forward. And we'll be doing that for the first couple of rockets. It gets prohibitively expensive later on, and we'll want to be spending that money on upgrading the VAB forever. Okay, so that's everything we need to do to get us started, I think. So let's go ahead and skip forward past the epileptic warp to complete. All right, as dawn rises over Kennedy Space Center, we are finishing up with the construction of our Tiny Tim, and just like in regular Kerbal construction time, we now have to roll that out, and that's going to take another 7 hours. So we're going to roll that out to the launch pad, but now it allows our Whack Corporal to be building while we're messing around with all of this. And we want to now also get our rush build done. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there we go. So we've spent a lot of our money. That's one strategy that I've heard, that you want to try to spend as much of the money as you can. Any money that you have sitting in your bank account is not doing you any good. It is in fact wasted instead of being invested in improving your space center. All right, so here we go. I think we are ready for our very first launch. All right, here we are on the pad. I have X Sciences here and now kind of sitting open. I've got some the MacLeod windows open, kind of displaying what few mods I do have installed on top of the Realism Overhaul, although these are all, you can find pretty much everything that I'm using in the recommended mods list. I'm not sure why this flag is doing what it's doing, but it's kind of jaunty, so we're gonna not worry too much about it. Or this either. But everything else looks so very pretty. So here we go, our very first launch, 3, 2, 1, take off. And we are up, and that's really all there is to it. So yeah, let's just grab the science, send it back down, which it takes a little bit longer to go in between because of the real antenna configuration that we did, where we increased that packet interval to 5 seconds to make sure that there's no bugs in actually retrieving this science. So hopefully this should all return. I'm fairly certain it all should, but that got us up to about 8 kilometers, a little bit more than 8 kilometers, and we flew very nice and stable and straight, pretty much right on the money here. As we hit our apoapsis and begin to fall back down, we are just waiting until the science has completed. But yeah, Tiny Tim launch. This is the booster stage of the Whack Corporal, and it forms the kind of design philosophy of the Aero B series of rockets, which I'll be using a lot of in the early game here, where they have a little kick stage that delivers a ton of impulse really quickly, and then it has a longer sustainer phase. And as this comes down, we are going to hit the range safety button to keep our space center safe. Just blow that thing up before it becomes a problem. And that's it. That's our first mission. You'll notice that we have vessel complete and 2 contracts completed, an uncrewed speed record and also first launch. There we go. It is time for some rocket science, as you need to continue to go higher, faster, and further. Okay, so we are now back to research and development with 2 science, which is actually very exciting in terms of our very first launch. And that's why we rushed things as fast as we did, because we wanted to get this moving. The nice thing is that the first couple nodes actually only cost 1 apiece. We want all of these nodes are incredibly important, but I find that this node here post-war rocketry testing is the most critical that you can open up first. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And when that unlocks in 146 days, once again, that's why we wanted to get moving, we will have access to new engine configurations, which improves the performance and is one of the primary drivers of technology progression in RP-1, because that allows us to upgrade from the WAC Corporal to the XASR, the Zasser. I'm not sure if you're actually supposed to pronounce it like that, but that's what I'm going to do. That engine is a massive upgrade, and there's a lot of other upgrades like that that we will be talking more about. So that is step one. We want that one first, bar none. Material science is where we're going to get a lot of good, really important technology upgrades, especially as that goes further on, but we don't need that next. What I think we're going to do next is we're going to go up here to supersonic plane development. I'm not a plane guy, but there is some plane shenanigans that we are going to be doing early on, and the thing that we want out of here is the X1 cockpit, and also the procedural supersonic capable wing parts. So that is our basic strategy for now, is we want to get those two going, and then from there we are going to continue to advance our space program, and we have a couple more launches to go. And we will get to those starting next time. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please share and subscribe. I'm hoping to really get back into the swing of recording and putting out Kerbal Space Program videos. I have plans for this series, and also maybe something involving JNSQ for another multiplanetary species style colony building adventure, but we'll see that when we get to it. See y'all next time.